What's the harsh reality no one accepts? Some parents just don't love their children. I was reading an article about 10 things therapists don't tell you. And one of them was that many parents admit they don't love their children. This one scares me. It would help if people actually gave a thought into having kids and didn't just have them, because it's what you're supposed to do. They're increasingly doing so. That's why birth rates are dropping like stones around the world. And number 7 surprises you. On a less dark, but related note, your parents definitely have a favorite child. Some people just can't be saved. You could give them every benefit in the world and they still could choose to throw it all away and you can't do anything about it. This is a tough lesson to learn. People have to want to change. Nothing you can do can make people change if they are resistant to it. This hurts and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I work with children who have suffered immense trauma and abuse. Far worse than you can imagine. I work with them when they're teens, and they've started to utilize coping mechanisms that society would deem to be cool, despite the fact those coping mechanisms have kept them alive. They may steal, lie, run away, take drugs, etc. They do it because no one has made them feel like they're worth believing in. Statistically, these children, when they become adults, are likely to not have jobs, have healthy relationships, or even have a home. It isn't a choice, they simply don't believe in themselves enough to think they're worth the effort. It isn't benefits they need, it's love. The most brutal truth is that a huge part of your life is determined at a very young age, as you may be aware. No matter what you do, it's incredibly hard to mentally make up for neglect or abuse in first few years. Yep. My wife worked as a resource teacher last school year, and there are 2 boys in grades 7 and 8 there who have been raised by a wonderful family since they were 3 years old. Caring parents who give them all the support and resources you could want. But their birth mother was an addict who neglected them regularly and then finally left them alone in the house at 1.5 and 2.5 years old for like an entire long weekend while she went on a bender before they were rescued, nearly starved and covered in filth. To this day, they have serious abandonment issues and are very strange with food. They eat anything in sight, eat their lunches first thing in the morning unless the staff intervenes and makes them leave it in their locker, beg other kids for parts of their lunches, and they eat like animals who are worried they'll miss their chance. These kids meet with therapists twice a week, have educational assistant support, a great family, and have had normal lives for a decade now. But these issues just aren't going away, and obviously their unusual behavior is a huge negative for their social lives, which isn't going to help. It's hard to envision these poor boys ever living healthy, normal lives, and they were barely old enough to remember the abuse. If they can't overcome that with all the advantages they've had, what hope do the kids who never had those resources have? Hard work doesn't always pay off. Something I learned my first week in the corporate world, and again even up until all the coronavirus layoffs. A non-executive's value to the company is strictly dictated by which side of the balance sheet their compensation falls. Beauty matters in how people treat people. As an average looking guy with amazingly photogenic kids, I get told a lot that I must have a beautiful wife. My daughter used to get free stuff all the time from shopkeepers, etc. Wow. She is so cute. Can I give her a sweet, etc. Really opened my eyes. Absolute strangers would offer her small gifts all the time. As a former ugly kid, it's really fricked up how people extend their shallowness to treating ugly kids badly. Couldn't agree more. There were 3-5 of us as kids used to play together. People always comment how the most beautiful kid is splendid. Shower her with attention plus ignoring the rest of us. Now that we are adults, we all, the average and the beautiful, developed some kind of unhealthy relationship with how we navigate the world as a female. Mistakes do define you. The little ones don't. But if you make a big mistake, it will alter your life to an extent. Saying that they don't matter is a lie that will prevent you from diagnosing life problems later down the line. This is something I wrestle with a lot in terms of my recovery from alcoholism. I quit young, at 24, and have been sober 7 years without relapse. Despite that accomplishment, I have alcoholic neuropathy, nerve damage, that will never go away no matter how long I'm sober. This is a wonderful accomplishment though. Quitting is so hard, even if you have every reason to. You chose life. Thanks. Best decision I've ever made. It gets a lot easier the more time you have. And luckily, my nerve damage is relatively minor, but it's not uncommon for me to get painful pins and needles sensations and numbness inserting fingers and throughout my left foot. People assume only hardcore alcoholics who drank for decades have these types of problems, but I was physically dependent for only 3 years and it happened. Alcohol is really freaking hard on the body. I'm so grateful it doesn't run my life anymore. I've always thought it's not the mistake that defines you in most cases, but how you handle it that does. There's a few like murder that can definitely define you though. Bad things will happen to you for no reason. I always liked the Star Trek quote, "It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose." That is not a weakness. That is life. For that reason, some things just happen and that's the way it is. That quote made me start watching Star Trek TNG on Netflix. Without exaggerating, it is one of the best shows ever made. Yep. The insane thing is that it would never have survived today, because S1 is pretty terrible and S2 isn't much better. It would have been. Attempted Star Trek reboot cancelled after 2 seasons despite best efforts of famous stage actor Patrick Stewart. Then season 3 starts and it all kicks off. There are still some corny episodes, obviously, it's Star Trek, but at its best it's arguably the greatest sci-fi series ever made. Some of its episodes are still seared into my mind 30 years later. Pain is inescapable. Not even acknowledging that pain is inevitable and preparing for it ahead of time can lessen it. You will be taken by surprise, you will be hurt, you will not enjoy it, you will not be able to numb it, and there is nothing you can do except take it on the chin. I am reminded of an iconic quote from Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land, and I paraphrase. I have discovered why humans laugh. Not because there is a levity, but because there is a wrongness. Humans laugh because something is wrong. Very few people truly accept their mortality, and most of the time when it truly sinks in, people get scared and want to avoid it. It keeps me up at night sometimes with a dread swelling in my stomach. I feel mine in my heart. It's that thought of just being over, gone, no longer experiencing. Good, bad, just experiencing. My heart starts to race, I get cold sweats, my stomach drops, my chest feels like it is sinking into itself, and feels like panic setting in. I have to force myself to go do something just to make it stop. Me too, brother. Horrifying anxiety attacks, complete overpowering sensation of dread and impending nothingness. It passes after a few moments, but it completely wrecks me emotionally for an hour or so afterwards. You don't always keep the good friends you meet, but that doesn't mean you can't make more later on down the road. From the BoJack Horseman finale, and something I've realized and made peace with. I think there are people that help you become the person that you end up being, and you can be grateful for them, even if they were never meant to be in your life forever. Alexa, play Mr. Blue. Money and good looks matter. And if you don't have enough good looks, just add money. And if you have neither, get drunk until you don't care anymore. First impressions are a very freaking big deal. They can be. My partner is on the road a lot for his job. This particular week he was away with one of the big bosses of the company. Everyone in the office knew the big boss was traveling with my partner in the car. My partner got a call from a customer and had to ring the office to finalize the sale all via the car kit. Office guy picks up the phone, "Yeah, what do you want?" in a super uninterested and gruff voice. Needless to say, he left a lasting impression. Seems like it's not that important, but in a workplace that kind of thing stands out. I worked at a pretty small retail chain in Australia that was doing very well overseas. Every now and then, big boss from overseas flies over to check up on how things were going. All I've ever heard is bitchy things about this woman. Anyway, one unassuming day, this lady walks right up to the counter, and within 10 seconds I say, "Hi, how are you going today?" with a smile. This lady kind of awkwardly laughs and my store manager laughs hysterically and is like, "Oh my god, that's Nicole. How are you, goof? How rude, you assume she was a customer. And Nicole just looked to my manager politely and said, well actually, you should assume everyone is a customer and treat them in that exact way. That was perfect. This was my first job and I was totally embarrassed. But it was flipped and I realized that interaction actually looked great for me. And I immediately impressed the big boss. Stupid of my manager to try and humiliate me. Some people just don't get a happy ending. Some people never find happiness or satisfaction. People tell you that there is light at the end of the tunnel. But for some people there isn't. They never get to see any light, just darkness. Yeah, I once lived with someone like that. She was in her 70s, 80s and I rented a room in her house for a few months. She was truly miserable. She told me about how she grew up in Turkey with an absent father and abusive alcoholic mother. She told me how she escaped her overbearing family by marrying an Indian diplomat. Then how her husband abused her for years. She was missing teeth because of it. Then when her family moved to Canada, how she worked 4 years for her husband and kids with no thanks. By the time I moved in with her, she was all alone, living in low-income housing, yelling at her kids on the phone once a week about how they are terrible children who never visit and ranting to me about how terrible her life had been and how many regrets she had. She was an awful person to be around, but it was clear she had lived a life full of suffering. A parrot can't say anything they haven't heard. Sometimes people who have only lived through malice and hate can't understand or reciprocate love. It's really difficult to do something that no one has shown you before. It's much easier to stick with what you know.